Good evening. Tonight I wanted to talk to you folks about Sasquatch hair samples and their hair in general. And I think it's pretty safe to say that they have hair similar to human hair, similar to like what you would find on a gorilla or an ape, and not like fur like you would see on a deer or a bear. I think it's a pretty safe to say that from all the eyewitness encounters and how human-like and sometimes ape-like that they look, and from their general build and from descriptions and from the patty film, and from a lot of unknown hair samples that have come up over the years out in the woods. And I think we can make some assumptions, maybe have some ideas, some hypothesis, if you will. And it might lead to some of the fact that they're very hard to spot. They seem to be the masters of their environment. People report them cloaking or blending in or taking a few steps in the woods and disappearing. No doubt they are the masters of the environment and the forest ninjas, if you will. But maybe their hair has something to do with it. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe through genetic adaptation over the years, selective evolution, by intelligent design, whatever you want to believe that has created them to have these abilities or these specific type of possible hair that is helping them blend in and hide and sneak around and do all the Squatch things that they're known for. One of the things that fascinates me is when people see them at night or in a low light situation, or maybe at night and they have their house lights on or headlights and they can just have a little bit of peripheral light, and they describe as seeing one as blacker than black. Now, some people report the glowing eyes, and that could be because their eyes are really adapted to night vision and they reflect a lot of light back to help them see better at night, kind of like cats and other animals that do really well at night. But that's a glowing red eye thing. That's something a little separate. I've talked about it in the past, but maybe in some situations their hairs are just incredibly dark. Maybe some clans or some regional varieties of Bigfoots are really adopted to operate at night and are primarily nocturnal. So when you want to talk about adaptation for blending in, for survival, polar bears, especially if you want to talk about a large mammal species, because I know there's chameleons and cuttlefish and octopuses and things that can blend their skin, but they are not mammals, obviously. But I think polar bears are very cool. As you can see from the nose and other areas and by their ears, they have black skin underneath. And what this does is helps absorb light. Anything, the darker the color, it absorbs more light and makes them warmer, which is obviously very important for as cold regions as they live in. Also, their hair is, they have longer, thicker hairs on the outside and smaller, thinner hairs on the inside, like guard hairs and longer hairs. And this also helps trap in, the very fine hairs help trap in air, which acts as insulation. Then they have a big layer of blubber as well. So they have a multifaceted way to protect themselves. Longer hair on the outside that blocks out the wind. But anyway, why this is important is, I guess, from what I was reading about polar bears and hearing, is that their hair is actually like a clear or like a very light whitish clear color. And this is why when you see them in this picture here, when they're not on the snow, they tend to look more yellow. And when they're out on the snow and maybe in a little more overcast, they look a lot more white. Or if it's a sunny day and they're out on the snow, they'll look a lot more yellow. It's just kind of the way that the light rays filter through and give them a look. And I'm sure there is something to do with them being a little dirty too, if they get around mud and other things. But generally, they always have a big fluffy appearance, white or off-white in color, and this has to do how the light is filtered through. And it made me think, if a large mammal, North American mammal, can grow these kind of adaptations, why couldn't a Sasquatch? Maybe they have something of a slight opaque or a slight hollowness or a slight clearness to their hair that would allow them, if they're more in a brown environment, to have more brown tones come through, or a greener environment to kind of blend in. So I think it's fascinating to think about that maybe Sasquatch has some of these abilities as well. So that leads me to one of the problems of verifying that you have a Sasquatch hair. Now, if you witness one rubbing against a tree or brushing against a tree or something, or a barbed wire fence, that's always places I like to look. Barbed wire fences are great at collecting hair, except usually if there's a barbed wire fence, there's usually cows or horses around, and that's what the kind of hair you're going to find. But for me, it's hard to verify if you find some hair out in the woods and it looks more like hair, less like fur. Maybe it's long and wispy. Is it a horsetail? Is it from a Sasquatch? Is it a human hair? Unless you see what directly deposited it, then you don't really know for sure. And then from that token, if I see a Sasquatch brush against a tree for a second, or I see one hiding behind a tree, and then I go over and collect the hair, well, who's going to believe me, especially with Sasquatch? I believe me, and other researchers might. But it would be a hard sell to convince people, so you'd have to film it in order to verify it, and then that's a whole nother ball of wax with the film. But that would be really great if you had even somewhat clear film and then leaving a hair behind, and then maybe you could even get a footprint that would be like the trifecta, I think. I think if you did that, then no, it's not a body, but I think that would be pretty awesome. Anyway, so the problem is if you find a weird hair sample in the woods, or anywhere for that matter, they compare it to other known animal species. And they, obviously, if you live in North America, they're not going to compare it to like a kangaroo or something that doesn't live here. So it's kind of hard to tell. It would just come back as unknown. They compare it to bear, different bear species, deer species, raccoons, skunks, whatever lives in that area, human. And if it comes up as slightly human, like Sasquatch seems to have a lot of resemblance to mankind, to humans, maybe if you pay for a really good test and wait a long time, they might be able to compare it to maybe gorilla and other primate species. That might be pushing it. But from samples that have been found, from other people report, some of them seem to have a very dark, I believe it's called a medulla, the thing in the center, the dark part. And other Sasquatch samples don't seem to have that at all, where they're quite clear. This could be genetic variation. It could be misidentification. Who knows? So I've really tried to do a lot of research and look into this. And people have different theories on what a Sasquatch hair might be and what it might look like. I think maybe a more hollow type is what I've been told, and other researchers have told me. They don't have that pigmentation. So if they're in the dark woods, they look darker. If they're next to brown trees or it's a really green, lush forest, they'll look a little more green and it'll kind of come through their fur. If they're in the dark, then they'll look darker. But also in contrast, if it's dark out and you hit one of these things with a spotlight, it would light up like a Christmas tree if it had clear hairs. So I don't know. There's a lot to be discovered. I think it's fascinating. I think if you can, what's nice now about our phones is you can Google hair samples instantly. Like pull up black bear sample. You can do a lot of research yourself without ever having to send it to a lab. I think length has a lot to do with it. Deer hair, elk hair tends to be really short. I know in the wintertime sometimes it gets longer in certain parts of it, but it's not going to be, more than a couple inches long. If you find something 7 or 8 inches long, human head hair type length, then, there's a lot of species you can discount. And I think color is that too. If it's brown or blonde, you can pretty much discount a skunk. If you find a dark black one, I think you can pretty much discount, like, if it's a long dark black hair, you can discount a deer. And I think you can kind of narrow it down yourself too. And if you want to find a lab or send it out to be analyzed and it comes back as unknown, don't be surprised, because like I said, it's all comparative sampling. But I do think it is crucial evidence, especially if you have multiple eyewitness report of, hey, we saw a Sasquatch behind a tree. It hopped over a fence. It was on the side of the house. And then we found these strange hairs, maybe 8 or 10 feet up in the air, where a deer or something isn't going to rub off, or even a horse tail or something. That might be possible too if you're in an area that has sightings. I mean, these are all kind of factors, but it's very hard to authenticate, like I said, unless you got, eyewitness reports and videotape and all that other stuff. As far as collecting it, the best way you can store it is not in a plastic bag. I mean, if that's all you have on you, but you definitely want to get some rubber gloves, tweezers, and an envelope. This envelope does not degrade. The organic material, the paper in an envelope, does not degrade the DNA if you want to submit it for DNA testing. If it's just general hair sampling, like a comparative test, then it's not as important. But I just recommend, you can have a small kit. You keep a couple rubber gloves, even just one. Maybe, have a pair of steam clean tweezers, or dip them in alcohol and let them dry. Throw that in a couple envelopes in your backpack when you're out hiking. And, take pictures of the area, take where you found it out. Maybe even if you have a tape measure, do a comparative height of where you found it up. the sample, and you can take your sterile tweezers, or mostly sterile tweezers, and put some gloves on and put it in an envelope, and you can keep it and send it off for DNA comparative testing, like we said, for your own personal collection. So yeah, I think Sasquatch hair, they have a potential to use this to their advantage. This is not proven. This is just a theory, of course, but I think it would explain a lot of the strange things that sometimes are reported for these guys to pretty much blend in and disappear. And that's kind of my 2 cents on it. Somebody emailed me a couple weeks back. I forget his name. I get so many emails, it's hard to keep track, and wanted a little more information. So this is the information that I have. This is a subject I think I made a video on a while back. And every so periodically, as I learn more and hear more, I'll update you guys and give you more information on hair samples. If I come across something myself, I think it's absolutely fascinating, because besides footprints and track cast and photo evidence, it's good physical evidence. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and stay safe in the woods, folks.